Sisters and brothers, I think when a lot of us first saw Occupy, we misjudged it. We thought it was a reincarnation of the anti-globalization movement, which wasn't a bad thing. It was progressive. I'm talking about the movement that in this country anyway came on the scene in Seattle in 1999 against the WTO and really lasted for about 2 or 3 years. 9/11 kind of shut it down. But it's not. It may look a little bit like the anti-globalization movement, but it's much deeper, much more serious, much more profound, and it's a reflection of a much more deeper and serious global capitalist crisis. The anti-globalization movement had limitations that at a certain point were pretty clear to us. It was self-absorbed. The question was it trying to reach out to the working class, or was it, what was that slogan, "We are democracy"? And clearly they weren't. They were good and they had good ideas and they were idealists, but they were alone. The OWS movement, in some of our estimation, really is a first kind of, not a first so much, but an important and significant first sign of the working class waking up in a whole new way in this country. And the movement is working class. It may have contradictions. It may resemble a little bit of the anti-globalization movement and have some of those contradictions. And I'm sure all of you have talked about, you know, the difficulties in terms of relating to the Black and Latino movement and all that. I'm sure you're constantly talking about that, and, you know, racism and women and who's at the leadership and all of the 1,001 questions that you're dealing with fairly well in some of our estimation. But what people need to get, who haven't figured the Occupy movement out, is that a lot of these young folks are folks that, you know, even a few years ago may have thought that they had a future under capitalism and have woken up and found out that that's not the case anymore. And it's global too. And they are defecting. They have in fact defected. It's much more significant than what we saw 10 years ago. And it's global. We know that. But even these demonstrations at the embassies over the past week and a half, which seem to be a reaction to a racist, stupid film, and it is to a certain extent, as it is also to U.S. imperialism and its political, cultural impact, you know, and the anger that it manifests in the Middle East and in Asia and around the world. But it's also the same thing that's moving the Occupy movement. A lot of those young people burning flags or whatever they're doing in front of embassies in Islamabad or Libya or Egypt or whatever, most of them are unemployed and have no future. 50% unemployment amongst young people, including young people with graduate degrees. This is the world. This is capitalism in 2012. It's also a bellwether, meaning that it may seem isolated now, but it's the handwriting on the world. Larger sections of our class are going to follow the Occupy movement, maybe with the Occupy movement, maybe in their own way. We'll figure out how we can help that, but that's coming. What are the lessons for the left? Where can one begin? The biggest lesson to me is it was a wake-up call for the left, frankly. The left knows a lot, and I'm sure that some of you have been quite bored by leftists lecturing you on all the things that you don't know, you know. But you can teach the left something too. And I'm here as a lifelong revolutionary leftist to tell you that a big chunk of the left, and you know, the left is different. Some of the left, good people, you know, good ideas, warm people, loving people, but, you know, they become too much a part of the institutions that capitalism rests on, you know. There's a revolutionary left, too. It has its own contradictions, and one of the contradictions it has is that we've suffered under such a desert, a long period of reaction in this country that some of us may have given up hope that there can be revolutionary change. And you reminded us that things are changing and that we better wake up and shake off any conservatism that we have. Shake off anything that's holding us back. Shake off anything that, is a barrier from us being more revolutionary and more visionary and more militant and more anti-capitalist, and saying that you can't solve the problems under the system and we must have something else that we're fighting for at the end of the day. I think you woke up the movement for all of those who want to be honest about it and are not just concerned about fragile egos. You did that, and we thank you. whether you survive, thrive, or whatever, we thank you for that. It's giving the labor movement big lessons. We only hope and pray that they're studying, that they're meditating on those lessons. Labor spent a lot of money to organize a big rally in 2010. Some of you may have gone to it, but with One Nation, hundreds of thousands of people. The capitalist media didn't even cover it. It wasn't a bad thing. I'm not saying that. I'm not, polemicizing against it. Let's talk to each other. But the fact of the matter is, it wasn't a threat. There's a difference between a protest and resistance. And when you occupy a park near Wall Street, that's the difference. You have transcended protest, and you are now entering resistance. They're both good. They both have their place. Protests are good. Sometimes the only thing you can do is protest. Sometimes you have to get a permit. We found out that you don't have to do it all the time. Sometimes you don't need a sound system because we got mic check. Thank you for that, too. I want to tell you something about the labor movement, see. Actually, they brought the Occupy movement in this epoch here first, 6 months before you did. While some of our sisters and brothers were beginning to occupy, well, not only North Africa and, Tahrir Square and all that, but even in Spain and in Athens, Greece. But also, what happened here? We had teachers and workers and students occupy the state capital of Wisconsin in Madison. A tremendous struggle that electrified everybody. What happened? The Democratic Party and their operatives in the labor movement finally wrestled control of it, told people to come out, stop the occupation, and put everything into, bourgeois capitalist electoral strategy that backfired anyway. And this was the lesson. Y'all picked it up. I just hope people were paying attention. In a way, the elections are such a killer. The question for us was not whether Occupy would survive. It was whether it would survive the elections. What happened? At about the same time that the police were smashing Occupy encampments from Oakland to New York to North Carolina to Texas, about the same time the media was changing its tune. The cameras weren't coming down to Sakati anymore. They were talking about the elections. Occupy's out, the elections are in. The Republican primaries. Oh my God, this is what was the big news, And even some of the labor movement at the leadership level was sidetracked by it, and they didn't come down anymore. Oh, that's good, that's past, but now we've got to turn toward the elections. I was there on Monday morning, 1 year later, September 17th. And I don't know how many people were there, but there were an awful lot of people there at 7 a.m., 7:30 in the morning. And it looks to me like y'all are very much alive. 7:30 in the morning. Let me tell you something. As a veteran activist, we have tried time and time again to bring a lot of people, anybody we could, down to Wall Street or someplace early in the morning to shut down something. And 1 out of 10 times, we are almost successful. When you're able, after all that you've been through, to bring a large crowd, broken up, you know, very wisely, very tactically, and do what you did. And all the other things you did in connection with the one-year anniversary. It's a sign that you have survived a very difficult year where the powers that be, after a few months, because you knocked them off, you confused and surprised them. You know, don't kid yourself. But once they got their act together, they were determined in a very centralized way to crush you. The question wasn't whether you would survive. The question was whether you would be crushed and who would have your back. But you have survived. Now, in Workers' World, we are now talking with more militant trade unionists, community organizers in every section of the country, and hopefully more and more with activists from the Occupy movement about what the next step should be. Maybe it won't be one next step. Maybe there'll be a variety of next steps on every level, and maybe that's the best thing. But one of the things that we've been talking about with other activists is seeing if we can convene or give some energy to a movement for people's power assemblies all around the country, a decentralized movement that hopefully, if it's even partially successful, would attract what I would call, you know, those in the Occupy movement, and I believe there are a lot of you, who are interested in the working class, who realize that you started it, but what is decisive about your survivability is to broaden your base and to make it blacker and to make it more Latino and more poor and more immigrant and more workers, you know. And I've seen you do that in such an incredible and fantastic way. I don't think the anti-globalization movement would have embraced May Day. But somehow, with all of your arguments and contradictions and baggage and what's good and what's bad, you embraced International Workers' Day. This was a very good sign on so many levels. That the People's Power Assemblies can be a combination of the Occupy movement and the social forces who may not have been at the table initially, but who realized that this was a good thing, and even though they weren't occupying Zuccotti Park or whatever other places you were occupying throughout, you know, the 48 states, that you opened up space. And believe me, people are going to need to fight back. The lesson, the biggest lesson, and I'll conclude on this, of the Occupy movement is that everybody who wants to fight for survival better get over whatever's stopping them, whatever hang-up they have about just cutting loose and going crazy on the 1%. Because hell is coming. Hell is already here. But if you can possibly imagine it, it's going to get worse. The elections are a big drug. Once they're over, regardless of who wins, the media is going to change its tune. And what they're going to be saying is, oh my goodness, the U.S. is going to turn into Greece. We have this debt, you see, and that's why we've got to do away with Social Security, and we've got to do away with Medicaid and Medicare, and give big tax breaks to the 1%, and no more public education. We've got to privatize it, and we can't have food stamps, and we can't have schools, and we've got to go back 200 years and maybe even reinstitute chattel slavery to save capitalism. They're going to change their tune. Doesn't matter who wins. See, right now, in a certain way, Obama has it easy because Romney is acting like such a massive, off-the-hook, reactionary, oh my goodness, let them eat cake, kind of fascistic moron, you know, that Obama doesn't have to say anything. But don't kid yourself. Obama's got a plan too. regardless of who wins. Actually, a well-known writer who interviewed, I think wrote several books about Obama and his policies, says, well, my last discussion with Obama, he explained to us that once the elections are over, we're going to hit that deficit because we don't want to be like Europe, and we don't want to be like Spain, and we don't want to be like Greece. The kitchen sink is coming at us. And if we want to defend our right to eat, to have a roof over our head, to have a job, to have health care, to have all the things that we need to survive, much enjoy life and thrive, we're going to have to fight like hell. And I think that you're the example. Finally, you know, one of the many questions that this crisis, this global crisis, and the Occupies coming on the scene opens up, is the question of whether a revolutionary communist party is a good thing. Is it relevant? Is it viable? Is it a thing of the past? Does it have a role to play? Is that role important? It's a big question. I won't even attempt to address it. I'll say this in closing. For those of you who understand that it might be relevant, you should do something about it. And for others who will have to be convinced in their own way, one way or another, which will be our job in Workers' World Party, well, we'll see how that goes. But back to those who understand. If you understand it, then do something about it. And hopefully do it with Workers' World Party. Occupy revolution. We are going to win. We are the 99% and we are on fire.